Hello, everyone. This is very exciting. I love that you all got out of bed. I actually was in bed, watching Netflix and chilling, and pounding gummy bears, which has become my comfort food in these difficult times. It's my distinct pleasure to interview Greg about his fantastic book. I want to say just a sentence about like what it meant to me. You know, I grew up in Palo Alto, in Silicon Valley, in the early days of when it was the personal computer revelation, and I was just steeped in the technology world in the early days, and I don't think I realized it was a religion, but reading this book made me understand how it was a religion, that I knew that I grew up in a sort of something and that I had to then unlearn that something. But I didn't have words for it. And Greg put all the words around it that it was just so beautiful for me because it helped me see all the pieces. So I'm really excited to share with you all the great insights. But I thought we should just start with a little bit about you, Greg. You describe yourself as a professional atheist and a tech agnostic, and you work as a humanist chaplain. So can you help us understand what does that all mean?
Yes, I think I can. Although, can I just acknowledge the room for a second? Is that okay? I just want to say, so it's skipping ahead just a little bit, but I have to say hi to you, and just to say that I was here for one of these events a couple years ago. It was Douglas Rushkoff, and I was blown away by the community. It's in the book. It's in chapter 8, the last chapter before the conclusion. And I wrote about this organization as the congregation, the tech responsibility, tech ethics congregation of the tech religion. But I was convinced that it couldn't be that crowded all the time. Like, it must have been just for Rushkoff. And so to be here and get a chance to talk to you myself and have it look the same, it's a testament to the organization and the organizing that they're doing. All tech is human. And it also speaks to the fact that they're very aware that there are people like you who really, really do want to talk about this and want to work on it. So I just applause from me first.
And also now that you've been deemed a congregation, there'll be a baptism later. You'll be doing.
Yes, I will baptize laptops, cell phones, all that for a fee. Yes, I Humanist Chaplain, which means chaplains are sort of the history of it is that we're religious advisors, except I'm non-religious. I'm an atheist myself, unless you want to get really philosophical about it and call me an agnostic. The term I prefer is humanist. Humanist is a reference to what I positively believe, what I do stand for, where I do get my ethics, my values, my sense of wanting to live a meaningful life and build a better world for all. And it comes from the fact that I'm human, that I'm only human. We all are, in my belief, collections of billions or trillions, really, of interconnected cells, every single one of which is the product of exploded stars billions of years ago. And we are, although in my belief, we're not given a purpose from heaven or anywhere else. We're what Carl Sagan talked about as the universe coming to know itself. And that something that I learned about when I was about 23 after having majored in religion and Chinese, and I thought I was going to be a Buddhist priest or something like that. And it just really hit me, and it's been my whole life ever since then. And I'm lucky enough to have this role at Harvard and now at MIT as well, where I advise people, not like tell them what to do with their life. I mean, I wouldn't be qualified. I don't think anybody should, but help people figure out if they're not religious and they don't believe that there's some sort of divine plan for them, who do they want to be and how do they want to live?
Awesome. So tell us about tech as a religion. This book is so interesting because he has real comparisons for everything. What is the comparison for heaven? And we'll get into all of those. But I wanted to start with kind of a flippant question because he talks about the practice of tech and how it's religious. So my question is, who's Jesus?
Well, first of all, it's got to be Adam Newman, right? The founder of WeWork, because he looks the most like Jesus, doesn't he? And by the way, that is how you get SoftBank billions. Like you have, the more you look and seem like whatever Jesus should be to the founders of SoftBank, the more billions you shall get. And is that not accurate?
Seems accurate.
All right. But really, the answer then would be, it depends which Jesus you're talking about. Okay, because what? There's a couple billion Christians in the world, right? But they don't all have the same definition of Jesus. They don't all have the same vision of Jesus. They certainly don't have all the same theology of Jesus, right? Some people, you may have noticed from my previous remarks a minute ago that I am not a Christian. But some people are Christian in ways that really terrify me and make me angry. But some people are Christian in ways that inspire me and make me want to be a better human myself. And some people are kind of in between, which is where a lot of us are, I think. And so, who's Jesus? In the tech religion, well, it depends which Jesus we're talking about, doesn't it?
The good one, the bad one.
Ah, the good one, the bad one. Yeah. I mean, the bad one, there are a lot of people in the tech world who are trying to control us, right? Not, maybe because they're like the stereotype of Doctor Doom or Thanos, like, right? It's not necessarily that. Even my friend Chris Gilliard, who's in the book as, Chris Hypervisible Gilliard, talks about Silicon Valley supervillains. And even he points out that the supervillains in comic books, they believe that it's for the good that they'll conquer the world, right? And so, the Jesus figures, the bad Jesus kind, they really believe that it's for the good that they get all the billions. It's what I would call a digital Puritanism, where there's this belief, like Puritans had this belief that you were an elect, and you were, of course, going to the best possible heaven, and everybody else was going to fire and brimstone hell. And there was nothing you could do to change your fate. You could only do the Protestant work ethic to show everybody, of course, I'm a little late. I mean, why wouldn't I be, right? I mean, you may not be, but right. So there was that. But now we have this belief of, well, it's kind of similar. And you could say, well, yeah, it's similar, except we don't have a literal heaven and a literal hell, but we kind of do.
Yeah, I'm going to skip to my question on heaven and hell then.
All right.
Because you write that this quote I felt like just was so perfect. You write, tech's focus on predicting future opportunities for profit rather than reckoning with the ethical challenges of the present can resemble religious tendencies to distract from earthly problems and focus on heaven. And I just felt like after we've had these 2 years of debating whether should we be worried about AI destroying the planet or in the future, taking over human life, or a bunch of people arguing like, actually, can we just focus on the actual problems that are happening on the ground, and those people being mostly dismissed. I hadn't put it in the heaven and hell context before, but it did seem very similar.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. I mean, I didn't start out planning to make a heaven and hell comparison, to compare ideas or faith doctrines in the tech world with things like heaven and hell. But just reading the literature and sort of tending the meetings and being in the world of tech people, AI people, it really struck me. So first of all, just the basics. There is a belief that is pretty widespread in the tech world. I don't know how familiar everybody here is with it. I assume there's a mix, but you guys are probably fairly knowledgeable about this. It's called long-termism. And the idea is that at some point, maybe millions of years in the future, there's going to be trillions of digital beings uploaded into the cloud. I guess it'll be powered by the power of distant stars, and that's what we're gonna have. Um, and what would I say about this?
Well, the people who are interested in long termism are always saying, what do we owe the future? That's their line. What do we owe to those future people? Which is their needs override our current needs, right? And I feel like that's I hadn't thought of it until I read your book, but it's very similar to the heaven issue, right? Which is like, what do we owe to this heavenly thing as opposed to like, what are we focusing on the ground here?
Yeah, and so the idea is that we don't want to focus on the present, making the world better in the present, because we, meaning the sort of the tech leaders, the tech overlords that I'm referring to in these early chapters of the book, because we're not really able to make the present better. They aren't. So what will happen in religion, in the sort of history of ancient religion, which I had a chance to study for many years, is people will go to the ruler and they'll say, well, it's not looking so good out there. It's not fair. It's not just. It's dirty. It's violent. There's no security for my family. You're oppressing us. Fix it. And the ruler either can't fix it or doesn't want to fix it or some combination thereof. And so, the way to get around that is to say, well, I have a plan for you. It's going to, in the distant future, if you obey what I want you to do, if you believe in what I want you to believe, then you're going to get to the place where it's going to be perfect and beautiful and wonderful. All you have to do is do what I say. And by the way, if you don't do that, then you go to the other place, right? And it's honestly, it's just very, very similar to the thinking in a lot of what we call this sort of mythological place called Silicon Valley, right? There's no physical territory of Silicon Valley. It's a myth, right? But it's better understood, I think, as a religion, because if I told you, well, there's this myth, and there's this guy Zeus and Hera and Achilles, and they really want us to do stuff. It's they've got a certain agenda. I mean, nobody here would take anything like that seriously, right? Of course you wouldn't. But if I told you, well, there's this religion, and you're expected to believe in it, and it has millions, maybe billions of members, and it has an agenda for all of us, and we need to follow that agenda, and if we don't, there'll be punishment. Well, first of all, you'd be very familiar with that way of thinking, and second of all, you might be pretty afraid, because you've seen that kind of thinking can have real world impact, can it not? And so it really did remind me of that as I was reading about these AI ideologies, the long-termism, and then the flip side of it. Should we do the flip side? The hell?
Yeah, let's do hell.
So hell. So in AI discourse, there is this idea, again, many of you very familiar probably, called X risk or existential risk. And what that refers to is the idea that according to a range of AI philosophers who've been surveyed for this, and this appears in a book by a guy named Toby Ord, who is the sort of leading philosopher, one of the leading philosophers. There's a competition for that title, I guess, of the effective altruist movement, which is a movement that's backed by many, many tech billionaires, some of whom are not even in jail yet. And
Are they in the running for bad Jesus?
Sam Bankman-Fried was growing his hair out, and he was really, I mean,
He was fighting
he was
for that
dressing
title.
like a modern day Jesus, and now he's in jail with P. Diddy. I mean, I actually think that might qualify him. So Anyway, um, so existential risk, we're told, and this, by the way, on the website 80,000 Hours, which is the career advising website of a career advising and philanthropically advising movement. I'm being charitable here, I hope. Called Effective Altruism. Um, it, it, you're told if you go to that movement, which is again is backed heavily by many, many tech billionaires, you're told that the number one problem that a young person should work on in the world is the problem of unaligned or runaway or essentially evil AI. That's the number one problem in the world, not climate, not nuclear power, not democracy, not peace, not justice. Runaway AI, right? And you're told that because they say there is a 10% chance. Now, how exactly did they calculate this, right? What about 9.5%? A 10% chance that runaway or unaligned or evil AI will eliminate, will destroy, will kill all human beings within the next 100 years, right? So, hell, right? Apocalypse, calamity. And the idea is it's not, this is not just a random prediction. Again, they want you to do stuff for them, right? The idea is follow our approach to AI, which in many cases does involve investing trillions of dollars immediately. Thank you, Sam Altman. Um, or you will go to hell,
The bad place.
the bad place.
Um, Another comparison to religion is, of course, we've got to talk about God. So, when I first started writing about privacy, it was about 2009. I was at the Wall Street Journal, and I went into my editors and I was like, there's all this like stuff tracking you across the internet, and they were like, no way, what? And so I was like, I'm gonna do some stories about it. And so I wrote a bunch of stories, and then I remember my editor called me into his office one day, and he said, I'm just, I'm feeling like they know all these things because my series was called What They Know, and it was all about all these things they know about you. And he was like, I think what you're talking about is God. And I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, God knows everything. And so now they've invented God. And I was like, I mean, you could look at it that way, but that's not how I'm seeing it. But I have noticed in the years since I've been writing about privacy that there are a lot of people who feel that same benevolence about surveillance because they feel that they're being seen. And maybe they haven't been seen, truly seen by people in their lives. And so I'm curious how you see God in this religious parable. Is it surveillance, or is it just Google, or is it the blockchain?
I love it. I love so much about what you were just saying because you and I come from somewhat similar backgrounds, not the same background, but somewhat parallel. And I think we both grew up maybe with like liberal understandings of Jewish God,
Yep.
and so it was kind of ineffable and mysterious, and it was the sort of thing that you didn't really have to believe in, but nonetheless, it's sort of present with us in our imagination, right? So all right. So God. I mean, first of all, um, I had people tell me at the beginning of my research for this book. I researched it for 6 years. I went all over the Silicon Valley world. I wrote for TechCrunch. I did 200 interviews, that sort of thing. But I had people tell me at the beginning, and I sort of worried about the beginning at the beginning. Well, it doesn't. I mean, it's like a religion, but it doesn't have. They would always have like an X, right? It's like a religion. I guess I could see some points that you're making, but it doesn't have X. And I kept finding that X was really right there. And so one of the things that they would do that with is God, right? It doesn't really have a God. OMG, there is so much discourse about tech God in really mainstream circles. And I mean, I don't even know which examples to cite for you. I could cite this religion called Way of the Future, which is started by this guy named Anthony Lewandowski, who made over $100 million as a self-driving car engineer for Uber and Google. Then he got convicted for stealing trade secrets, and Trump had to pardon him right before he went to jail on the last day of the Trump administration. But I digress. He invents this religion that
Another bad Jesus.
yes, and yeah. By the way, these people, they're not the actual God. They're all the prophet, right? Like Paul was the marketing guy for Jesus. And again, if you're a devout Christian, really sincere, like take that with a grain of salt. Obviously, like Paul can be the marketing guy for Jesus, in a good way too. But in this case, yeah, we're talking about the bad one, I guess. And so, uh, you know, so Lewandowski has this religion. He files the paperwork for it, with the United States government, and he says the religion is called Way of the Future, and it is the worship of AI because AI is about to become a god, and when it does, he says, for all intents and purposes, a god, right? But he says worship it because when it comes online as the god, it will be very angry that we did not worship it sooner, right? So it's the jealous God of the Old Testament. Okay. So there's that. And then there's like another example that's fun is so there's this other book called AI Snake Oil by these two Princeton scholars of AI, Arvind Narayanan and Sayesh Kapoor. And it's a good book. It's Princeton Press, and it's what AI can do, what it can't do, realistic answers. But they've got this article on their popular Substack that sort of advertises the book. And the headline of the article, it's a recent one, is essentially AI companies have pivoted from building God to creating products good, right? But little textual analysis here, a little biblical criticism. If you have to pivot from building a god, there must be a lot of god building going on at some point, right? And so I could go on, and don't worry, the book does in chapter 2. But yeah, the point though, and this isn't even addressing your question, which is about the surveillance god. So let me just do a second on that, right? So surveillance. Yes, what is it but a force that is literally in the sky all around us now, that looks down on us, sees us, sees our every movement, increasingly hears our every breath, feels our every pulse. When I'm sleeping in my sleep number bed, it literally feels my every breath, right? And
It's constantly judging you,
it knows when
just
you
like
it
God.
knows when you've been naughty, it knows when you've been nice, it knows when you've been bad or good. So be good for goodness, right? It's this idea that that God is it's watching you so that your behavior will correspond to what it ought to. And that's the traditional religion in many cases, and it's the tech religion in many cases.
I do want to say, I feel like we're being a little bit mean about God and Jesus here, and I do want to say,
Well, yeah. So I mean, talk about the good part.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say Jesus, actually wanted to help the poor, right? Like he was, as far as I understand the reading of it all. So I just wanted to throw in a little line here.
Well, let's take that on for a second. I think that's very important, Julia, because again, religion to me is a mixed bag. Both in the sense that it has different aspects to it, like it has different communities, right? So some religious communities do something very different with their Christianity, their Islam, their Hinduism, their Buddhism. And by the way, atheist and humanist communities, which I've led and participated in, are very much like this too. You've got some communities of atheists and humanists who do a lot of good stuff, and you've got others that will take you down weird rabbit holes. In fact, many of those are the secular tech people. I talk in the book about how I had been to, thousands of meetings of the secular, humanist, non-religious, atheist, agnostic community. And then I started going to tech meetings after, when I started researching this book. And I realized, oh, these meetings tend to be more secular than the atheist meetings I go to. I mean, there's no industry in the world that, and I do call it a religion, not an industry, but there's no entity in the world that's more secular, I've found, than Silicon Valley. So anyway, my point is just that even within a given religious tradition, there's so much variation, and I really do sincerely mean that I've learned a lot of the best things in my life. And I learned to try to fight for justice in the tech world in many cases from good, decent, thoughtful, honest, wise religious people who learn humility from their God and from their congregations, who learn honesty, integrity, and they teach it and they preach it. And so I just want to make that clear, and I do try to get at that in the Reformation sections of the book, because
which we're gonna get to.
yeah, I just want you to know, like, at least a third, if not more, like half of the book in my heart is the positive alternative to the bad parts of the tech religion. It's not all just me complaining and doing comedy routines about how ridiculous some of this stuff is.
Okay, we will get to it, but we just have to do a little bit more bad. I'm sorry, and
Sure.
then
Yeah,
we'll get
of
to the
course.
Reformation.
The book starts with that for sure.
Because I think another part that really was just a little bit too close to home was how you describe the rituals and practices of tech. This is what he writes: daily prayers pale in comparison to the influence of the almighty screen, to which the average American now genuflects close to 200 times per day. You talk a little bit about how this compares to Durkheim's description of the collective effervescence of religious rituals. You also talk about your own struggles with tech addiction. I started to feel like I didn't know what the difference was between addiction and religious practice. And then I lost myself in Marx with religion as the opiate of the masses. So I'm literally reading this off of a screen to you right now. So
I absolve you.
Thank you.
It put in the transcript that was a joke. But yes. First of all, so the first section of the book, the first like 100 pages or so, is beliefs, because a big part of religion is what we believe. But the second 100 pages of the book, and this I knew even before I wrote it, had to be practices, because religions are more than just beliefs; they're beliefs and practices, and communities as well. But we'll get to that in a bit. And so, what are the practices? First of all, the first chapter in this is I call it hierarchies. At first, I was thinking of calling it caste, which is the Indian religious practice of hierarchical system in which some people are closer to God than others, and some people are the priestly caste, the highest caste, and some people literally can't be touched. Right? They're so lowly. And I thought about doing that. I thought, oh, that's an apt comparison, but I do want to make the point though that I decided I couldn't do that comparison because it was over the top. It was hyperbolic. Like, there's only a couple things. Isabel Wilkerson, the wonderful African American, history writer, writes in her book Caste that really it's mainly the Indian system and then American racism that qualify as caste. And I didn't want to, go against her on that, because it's not. The tech world has many, many flaws, but it's not at that level. It's not that bad, honestly, even at its worst. But I thought, okay, but it does have hierarchies, right? All religions in some form or another have hierarchies. Like in Orthodox Judaism, if you wake up in the morning, if you're a man, before you're allowed to do almost anything else, you have to say a set of prayers that involves thanking God for not making you a woman, right? So that's an example of hierarchy in religion. And as many of you know, it's very present, and there are hierarchies that are at least analogous to that in the tech world. Um, I could go on there, but I mean, maybe I'll save that. The next practice that I talk about is the ritual practice that religions um, are, very deeply composed. I think even more so than any kind of beliefs, of these little moments, whether it's moments in a day, moments in a week, moments in a month, moments in a year, moments in a lifetime, where it's a special set aside moment where we're supposed to acknowledge whatever the higher truth is, right? And oh boy, tech religion has its rituals, right? Oh, I left my phone in the green room. Isn't that nice? Did you ever get the chance to get away from your phone anymore?
You don't mind just
No,
for like ritual
just
purposes?
to genuflect. No, it's so there really is that sense, the stained glass black mirror, right? Um, but I guess what I want to say, and this is sort of a hopeful thing, um, is how are you saying it? You were saying, you're looking at the phone, right? And it was what that you're sort of apologizing for looking at your phone. And we were talking about this before, and what I thought to say was, no, I've had a change of heart based on the research that I did for this book, where um, first I was thinking about my own tech addiction. I was I researched this and wrote about it in my 2009-10 book, Good Without God, because I was writing that book as a young person, young writer, and I was really scared. It felt like I was, I had a book contract, and I wanted to show my late dad, who was already long dead at that point. I wanted to show him that I could be successful, and I was just so scared that I wasn't going to be, and that if I wasn't successful, then I was nothing and less than nothing, and it was basically like my own private hell. And it was such an overwhelming negative feeling that I sought escape. But like, I'm not really a drug person or an alcohol person. I'm kind of like too scared to do that stuff either. So the escape was my tech. It's just like being on the phone, first the Palm Pilot Trio, then it was the iPhone, it was the laptop. It was just like toggling back and forth between the NewYorkTimes.com and ESPN, and um, and I was so sure that I was addicted that I literally went and sought formal addiction recovery treatment. And I write about this in Tech Agnostic too. I went to something called Smart Recovery, which is an alternative to 12-step methods. Without the it doesn't have the higher power stuff. Instead, it's created by cognitive scientists, medical school professors, et cetera. So I went to their meetings and I explained, like, I'm addicted to my tech, and they laughed their asses off at me. But they also said, yeah, I kind of get that. Kind of get that. Researching this book, though, um, I realized, like, okay, but if it's an addiction, you can't go cold turkey, right? Like, what am I going to do? Tell you uh, that you can never use tech again because you're too addicted? What am I going to do? Tell my students that? Tell my kids that? I mean, the ship has sailed. And so I realized, as I was writing the book, that I had to talk to eating disorder experts, because it's like an eating disorder much more than it is an addiction. With an eating disorder, you can't stop eating the food, and moreover, you can't even have like a negative relationship with the food where you think, I'm eating this food right now but I hate myself for it. No, don't do that, right? It's You transform your relationship. And the thing that the eating disorder experts that I spoke to for this did to really um, cure me. I mean, really help me in a deep, deep way that I hope you can take with you as well in that chapter. It's chapter 5 on ritual. Is instead of instead of fear as your motivator, right? I'm eating this food or not eating it because I'm afraid I need to look a certain way. I'm afraid if I don't look a certain way, everyone will hate me. Everybody will think I'm nothing, etc. I'm posting this Instagram post or I'm starting this startup because I feel worthless. And unless I'm really successful or really beautiful or whatever, I'll feel like everybody hates me and everybody, I'm worthless and I'm in hell, my own private hell. Instead of that, you go to the hope, right? I'm eating this food because it's going to nourish me, because I love the people I love and it's going to help me to connect with them, but to eat with them, or it's going to make me healthy so I can do the activities that I love and do even more of them, or live longer to see my kids or my grandkids or whatever, right? And with the tech, it's the hope of I I want to connect with people. And sometimes that's going to be on a screen and that's okay. So I'm going to try to connect with people. I want to do good work. And so I'm going to try to do good work on the screen. I want to get my message out. So I'm going to try to post it online. That's the hope. And so no, I don't really feel like we need to worry about, if you're going to read your screen, enjoy.
Just be mindful about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, go for the hope, not the fear.
Okay, well, we have to wrap up, but I barely gave us time for the positive view. So tell us how we're going to break the hold of this religion and find a new humanistic future without going through the Protestant Reformation, which, as I recall, was rather bloody.
Yeah. It's not saying that we need to. I do talk about Martin Luther, but it's not. Or but or Luther rather, but it's not. Really closer to the Reform Judaism or Reform Islam or Reform Buddhism. These things all exist. Bloody, more ideas based reformations, right? But here's the thing, and it's okay that we're skipping this a bit because I do kind of want people to read the book. But this community is featured in one of my Reformation chapters. Not the chapter on the heretics and the apostates. I love that chapter. Please read that. Not the chapter even on people building the positive alternative. It's the chapter on the congregation. The idea that if religion didn't have congregations, nobody would care about religion. Nobody would care. Like if it was just all isolated ideas and little rituals that you're supposed to do on your own, and it wasn't about connecting you with other people to help you live your life, nobody would care. And I honestly think tech ethics, tech responsibility is very similar to that. Like, if we're going to try to make tech more responsible, more ethical, without actually connecting people and bringing them together in some form congregational thing, it's going to be very difficult. And so, speaking of difficult, I try to go in the chapter on all tech is human to a difficult place where David, Rebecca, Sandra, all of you. I mean, I love you. I love the work that you're doing, and I try to hold you accountable in that chapter and wonder out loud, like, this organization's getting big. What's it going to do with the money? Where's it going to get the money from? Who's it going to be beholden to? Um, but I'm doing that from within your congregation. Like, I'm a card carrying member of whatever this is. I just want you to do it right because I care, and so do all of us, and and so do you. I really I came to believe that. I mean, we're still going to hold you accountable, but I really believe that. And so that's the message is like there really is a lot that we can do to make tech better than it is, better than the sort of jokey stuff that we were talking about before. That's all too serious, honestly, because it has trillions of dollars and democracy's worth of implications. But there is much that we can do to impact it for the better, to steer it towards its better angels, if we do it together. And that's why it's so exciting and fun and really an honor for me to be saying so in this space.
Well, that is a perfect ending. He was not, I believe, paid.